Hello everyone, this is Steve Kramer, UNCG Business Librarian with a requested video on how to map market data, or in other words, Introduction to Marketing using GIS type software. Let me show you my agenda. We're going to talk about what GIS mapping is. Just briefly, you can map both points and shapes. Shapes are census geographies. I'll show you an image of those. How to use the colors to represent the data, how to change the type of classification used for the data, and I'll briefly mention that there's public and private data, census data, for example, compared to, say, private market research companies such as Simmons. And finally, a quick demonstration of filtering, where you add a second layer of data on top of your previous layer of data. So that's really our scope for today. Let me show you SimplyAnalytics as a way to kind of walk through and illustrate some of these concepts. Actually, let me show you this first. So I mentioned shapes already. Shapes are geographies, places that you can map. And they include states. Inside each state, there are counties. Inside counties, there are census tracts. That's this thing here in the middle. Census tracts about 4,000 persons. And within census tracts, you have block groups, which are about 2,000 persons. These are all nested, and they all kind of fit inside each other. In addition to these, we have places, which is what we call cities and townships and villages, municipalities, in other words. So those are all examples of things that we can map. And now we'll get into actually looking at some data and talking about some of the other concepts. On my research guide for marketing and other places as well, there is a market data section, which includes SimplyAnalytics. So it's a library database. We pay for this, thanks in part to tuition paid by students. And I'm going to log in. It is available on and off campus. I'm off campus right now at home making this video, for example. And when you do this the first time, you'll be asked if you want to open just a national search with some basic data. You have an option of creating your own account or using a guest access. If you ever think you might use this more than once, go ahead and create your own account. Use your own password, make up a password, because it saves your searches. You can see here I've got some things already on screen because I've used it before, of course. So if you're going to use this more than once, make your own account. It'll help you save time in the long run. Okay. And I mentioned mapping data. We can map shapes and points. Points is simply a physical address or a place with a defined latitude and longitude. That's a basic GIS function. And in this database, you do that using businesses. That's the kind of points data it has. So for example, keep this simple. I'm going to type in coffee and look for places that have the word coffee in their names or industries. It's a little hard to see with the yellow dots on the red scale. Let me change to purple. And in this place, which is Boston, I believe, you'll see we have points such as Coffee Break Cafe, Quincy, Massachusetts, Old Colony Avenue. So that's sample of points data. Otherwise, though, in this database for market data, you're using shapes, meaning places. And in this list here, you can see the breakdowns I already alluded to with the infographic. So states, counties, cities, also called places, zip codes, census tracts, about 4,000 person neighborhoods. And inside those tracts, block groups, about 2,000 persons. So that's your options for defining places. Quick note here, zip codes are very popular and have been for decades with market research because everyone knows about zip codes and there are not that many of them, so it's easier to publish data on them. But zip codes, as you may know, can have different amounts of population. Some of them are small, some of them are big in terms of how many people live there. You can't compare zip codes in some ways by population size because they vary too much. And some zip codes are not really that comparable anyway inside them because they're just sprawling shapes that don't necessarily reflect the nature of the neighborhoods. Zip codes are created by the post office to deliver mail, physical mail. They're not created by marketers or demographers to define similar kinds of places, similar groups of persons. So you can do zip codes, but tracts and block groups are comparable by size. All tracts are somewhat similar in terms of size, 4,000 persons in this example. And also they're meant to be somewhat similar in terms of socioeconomic status. So I recommend tracts and block groups more so than zip codes, but use whatever kind you want. It's up to you. That's the nature of shapes and Places. Now notice we're using colors. Word for this is choropleth. That's when you use colors to create defined scales. And here you can see data point is percentage of internet home access in Boston area. Urban place, somewhat wealthy overall. So these numbers are pretty high. But I can change them too. For example, I'm going to click on edit on my legend. And I usually recommend everyone try first quantiles local. That's one classification method for your color schemes. Notice the difference here. You can see it quite easily. We are now seeing more variety, more diversity of colors. And basically what quantiles means is that you get equal number of colors that you've chosen to display. I have 5 colors here from white to dark purple. If there are 100 census tracts on screen, I don't know how many there are, but let's just pretend 100. That means we get 25 white, 25 lavender, 25 middle pink or middle purple, 25 darker purple, 25 darkest purple. I misspoke, 20, sorry. There's 5 within 100. So if there's 100 census tracts and you have 20 of each, I apologize for that. In other words, you see the most colors. Quantiles means you see the most colors on your screen. And local means the data is defined by the local data. You're not looking at national patterns and then trying to define an example of that. For why this matters, let me see if I can quickly show you another example of why national versus local data matters. Let's switch to Miami-Dade County in Florida, of course. I'm going to turn off the coffee data. I don't want that anymore. It's messy. Zoom in a little bit. Not that much. And I'm going to change my data points. Tracks are okay. Let's go into data. I want to look at, this is something I was helping some MBA students with a couple of nights ago, foreign-born populations, people that were born outside the country and now are living either as citizens or non-citizens in the United States. And let's do this by percentage. And now let's look at the legend again. Let me turn off the yellow. I don't like the yellow borders. Okay, notice it defaulted back to quantiles national. Look at this, almost every census tract is dark red, meaning somewhere between 10% and 100%. There's a few light reds as well, as you can see. Kind of tells you that compared to national averages, the percentages of foreign-born persons in Miami-Dade County is really, really high. That's the point of using quantiles national as your method in this case. But if I change to local, as I said, you're going to see more colors. It's going to be a little more diverse in terms of color scheme. There you go. So with just focusing on Miami itself, the dark reds now show you the neighborhoods are really high percentage of foreign-born people, naturalized citizens in this case. So even though Miami overall has very high percentages compared to the country as a whole of foreign-born persons, these dark red neighborhoods, census tracts, are really have within Miami itself have a really high percentage. So it's kind of like telling stories. Is the point of your story that Miami-Dade County has a really high percentage of persons who were not born in the United States? You can tell that story using quantiles national, the first example. If you're trying to emphasize that even within this place, there are some differences, we can see this kind of east-west band here where there's just a high density of dark reds. So this is the most foreign-born naturalized citizen section of Miami-Dade County. Depends on the story you're trying to tell. Are you looking for diversity inside this county, or just showing the whole county as a whole is very atypical regarding this statistic. So that's national versus locals. Quickly, natural breaks just looks for patterns. Are there any patterns, normal kind of cutoffs or ranges? The numbers are going to be a bit different. May not look too different, but you kind of see if there's any like patterns that show up. You can also just do equal intervals. If you just want to say, I want every section to have the same percentage. Each of these colors now represents 20%, 0 to 20, 20 to 40, and so on. It may not be a good way to tell your story, but then you get a sense of just breaking it down. And you will not have equal numbers of colors. I only see a few counties, census tracts that are dark red now. And finally, you can do it yourself. I really want to only look at between 40 and 50% of this data. I can just type in my own numbers as well, or even change your colors. I really want to emphasize the middle. So I'm going to make that some other color. just to really show how dominant that one is or not. So think about that in terms of your chloroplyth classification methods. Quick answer, quantiles local is typically what I use most often, but it depends on what you're trying to say, of course. Looking at my notes for what else I want to talk about today. I think that's good for the map so far. Okay, let's talk about the data. There's two, as I mentioned in my outline, there's two main types in some ways of breaking it down: public data and private data. Public data, government data, census data, and that could be from the 2010 or 2020 decennial census. But most of the data you're going to find here is actually from a study from the census that is done annually, continuously, using sampling called the American Community Survey. So almost all the detailed data we get from the census is from this, the ACS. The 10,020 census only asks a very limited number of questions, typically involving just basic population data. Gender, they only do the binary male, female. They're not yet acknowledging different types of gender identity. So sorry about that. The core races, and I know race is a complex issue, of course, but the census has long tried to track them, and there are some disparities like in health indicators and homeownership that reflect structural racism with race. So there's still value in using those definitions, I would argue, and other people do as well. Ages, number of persons. So the ACS is really where the data comes from. And if you're in SimplyAnalytics, go to data folders, you can see at the bottom, they do break it down. And you can see, just for example, here's the data points for 2010, 2020 now is being done now, so that's not finished yet. Pretty basic stuff, population, and some basic housing. That's kind of all we get. ACS, though, you'll see a much larger list of folders representing subsets of this data. And I'm not trying to make a big point here, it's just that when you're looking at census data, and it's not just population, you really probably want ACS data, and that's what you'll get when you keyword search for different types of data too. You can see just much more here for ACS. In addition to census data, there's also county business patterns data from the census. That's industry business data, FBI data. There's also Bureau of Labor Statistics, which gives you spending levels. There's a spending survey. I'll show you that really briefly too. Here's the BLS homepage. Yes, labor and unemployment are sort of the most things they're most famous for, but one of their annual studies is this one, Consumer Expenditure Survey. So that is this core way we find out how much money people spend on stuff. And this database gives you that data at a very detailed level down to neighborhood levels. So that's the public data, but also you have private data in here, typically psychographic data, or put in other words, behavioral data, like this list of consumer behavior topics. That's going to come out of the private data. There are companies like EASI that compile this data. Also major companies for market research like Simmons and MRI, which recently combined, that have vital annual surveys of behavior, of interest in doing certain things, of likelihood to do certain activities, that also is in this database. And back on the data folder, you can see under Simmons Local. I won't spend much time on this because we could spend all day on it, but you'll get a sense once this folder pops up, list of folders pops up, how diverse the topics are. Let me try to nudge it just a little bit as it comes up. There we go. So just if you have time in this video, look at just the diversity of topics here too. So that's kind of data, public and private. I generally keyword search for what I need. There are these nice options to filter and see different types of things. But if I need yoga data, just type in yoga. You don't have to dig deep in these folders to find it. And let me point out something else important about the data here. There's a lot of different types of data, number of persons, the percentage of persons. We'll talk about why you sometimes want percentage versus number, total number, in a second. Dollar amounts, how much money is spent on yoga, how much money is spent on food, different types of food, on beer and whiskey, for example. That's in here too. So you have dollar amounts, and there's also index figures. I don't think I want to go into that today just because I don't want to make this video too long, but index figures largely define a nationwide base of either 1 or 100, And if a number for a place is higher than a 1 or 100, depending on the base figure, usually it's 100, that means that place is more interested in this activity. If it's under 100, like 98 or 90 or 70, whatever, then you have less interest in it. And that's one way to compare interest in activity or behavior or something like that in a place compared to national averages. So you get that index data as well. Okay, example here. Number of times you participated in yoga in the last 12 months by number of persons. When you are comparing places of like sizes, and I emphasize this already, census tracts are examples of this, or block groups, it's very easy then to compare number of persons in places. If you change to zip codes, or even worse, in some ways, counties, let me zoom out a little bit so we get to see much more of Florida. You are now really comparing apples and oranges. The biggest counties in Florida have those people that do yoga. That's sort of just, maybe that's common sense, and it's true. The smallest population counties have the fewest people who do yoga, okay? So maybe you always want to go to the biggest cities or the biggest counties to open a yoga business. I mean, there's reason for that. There's more people there, but maybe more competition as well. When you're comparing counties or cities, just be aware, biggest cities always come out, almost always come out on top. How much money is spent on clothing in North Carolina cities? Well, Charlotte and Raleigh, they're always going to be number one, number two. You don't really learn a whole lot that way because they're different sizes of populations. Therefore, you may also want to try using the percentage data. I'm going to change my map here. And this might not look too different. I mean, yoga, I would suggest is more of an urban activity, maybe skews younger. I mean, we can study this and measure this and make sure those assumptions are true. But now we are comparing counties of different sizes of population by percentage of interest, and see the data now as percentages between 6.9 and 9.4. And yes, Miami-Dade still comes up pretty high among other counties. So when you're comparing places of different sizes, percentages, not total number, often a better way to go when you're measuring people. Likewise, if you're looking for spending on products such as wine, we can look for absolute total spending in thousands. You'll see the scale is going to be big. We add 3 digits to this because the scale is 0, 0, 0. So this bottom one is actually $5 million to $331 million being spent. And the data here, they must drink a lot of wine in Florida compared to this data. So let's change it to Quantiles Local, see which counties actually drink the most wine. There we go. There's no more diversity in color there too. But again, choosing total number of spending in a place always favors the big places, the big counties. Therefore, like with yoga, except with money, we can go to wine again, and this time do household average. And we might not see a whole lot of difference, but now we can compare counties accurately, or at least in useful ways, because we're comparing average spending per household, per family unit, per individual living by him or herself or their self in a place, depending on your type of households you have. So think about choosing percentage or numbers when you have those choices. In this database, one reason to have your own account is that you can go in and, oops, I typed in York and I meant to type in wine, or I combined wine and yoga or something. One thing you can do is make an item a favorite. Then when I come over here to my data, I click on favorites, which is a star, and there's wine. The other wine's already in my list, so that's down here somewhere because I added it a while ago. But I can always come back now to this list even after I log in tomorrow, and it's still here. Likewise with locations, I have favorite locations that I've created. So that's one nice thing. If you do a search and you get a lot of hits for something you want, income's going to give you thousands of hits because there's so many different types of income data. If I search income under data, not under location. And I might want to go and add a bunch of these to my favorites because otherwise I have to come back each time to find them again. Notice here too, number of households with incomes, different ranges as number and as percentage. So think about that as you go along. Okay, finally here, final topic, filtering. So when we're largely looking at one thing at a time, one variable at a time, there are ways of doing what we call cross-tabulation, where you're combining data points. Like I want to find wealthy older people. with no kids at home. Kids have moved away or they never had kids in the first place. That's an example of a multivariable statistic where you're combining data, cross-tabbing. You're connecting different tables together. That's where the word cross-tabulation comes from, or the phrase. This isn't cross-tabulation, but one way to combine data is to filter out counties or places that don't fit two search topics or two topics. So for example, we'll leave this up here. This is wine average spending. I'm going to go to filtering, and let's turn this on. And this is something I already had set up. I'm going to see what counties, I think 100,000 is too high for this. Let's go somewhat near the national average. Might be a little high. Have to look up and see what that number is right now after the COVID recession. But let's see what counties, how counties look for drinking wine household average dollars amounts, but also only for those counties that have $70,000 or more as a median household income. And I might have to change that number if it looks like I don't have good data. Okay, it did work. Notice not too many counties in Florida have this average level of income. That's upper level income. And you can see it's South Florida really shows up pretty high, and Monroe County, which includes Key West down here at the bottom. And not too many others. As you move around the country, the map will refresh and more of these counties, once it redoes its research, will drop out. So this is one way to identify wealthy counties that do spend a lot on average by household on wine. That's called filtering. And you can do multi-level filtering. I could add a third filter, I don't know, for ages. I want counties that are older than average for the country in terms of people that live there. But if you go too crazy, you eventually end up with no counties. So be careful with that, or any places. And I've been talking about counties a lot. I know that for the last few minutes, but I could also go in. Let me maybe do one more thing here, then we'll wrap this up. Let's focus on South Florida. Doesn't like how I keep changing the location. Okay, let's change it to zip codes. And we lost some zip codes. There we go. Zoom in a little bit more to Miami-Dade County area. And now, as I mentioned, let's do tracts, which means neighborhoods for about 4,000 persons. Still have wine spending. And by the way, Everglades there on the left side, these are huge counties. Sorry, census tracts, because no one lives there. So that's why those census tracts are huge. But in terms of persons, they're the same. These little downtown neighborhoods have as many people as this whole big Everglades section, because we're comparing equal places by population. And you can see the filtering still working. So we're losing neighborhoods inside Miami that don't have this level of income. We're now finding higher income neighborhoods in Miami that still drink a lot of wine, or at least we can see what wine they're drinking by these numbers. All right, I think that's it. So hopefully this introduction to GIS mapping data using this web software is useful. There is high-end GIS data tools such as ArcGIS that is used by our geography department and by a few other people around who do high-end data work, often with their own data. But this SimplyAnalytics tool is meant to be used by anybody with just a little bit of training. Hopefully you can come in and get some good market data, private data, public data. Think about the legend and how you classify your data. Think about if you want states, counties, cities, zip codes, census tracts, block groups, a lot of good options for you all. And as always, please let me know if I can support you as you do your own data mapping work. That's it. Thank you for watching.